Mr. President, tensions in the Middle East have escalated dramatically since Hamas, an Iranian-backed terrorist organization, launched its war on Israel on October the 7th of last year, killing innocent men, women, and children, and taking and still holding up to 132 hostages. Over the last few months, another Iranian proxy, Iran-backed militias, have intensified their attacks throughout the region. There are Houthis in Yemen, there is Hezbollah in Lebanon, and, of course, as I mentioned, the attacks against Americans and American interests by Iranian proxies in Iraq and Syria. These conflicts are playing out thousands of miles away from here, but we are not just a distant and disinterested spectator. Thousands of American troops are stationed in the region, not engaged in combat operations, but in carrying out a range of security and intelligence missions and helping the residents and citizens of those nations defend themselves and provide a stabilizing force against what is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism, which is the Iranian regime. The presence of these American troops is vital to the stability of the region and, as I said, our own security interests. We may like to think, we may engage in wishful thinking, what happens over there doesn't affect us here. Now, you would think after 9/11, albeit occurring some 23 years ago now, would have awakened us to the reality that what does happen in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. So it is important for us to provide stability operations and assistance, train and assist operations for our allies in the region in a very dangerous neighborhood. Since mid-October, Iranian-backed militia groups have attacked U.S. troops in the region more than 165 times. 165 times. In less than 4 months, U.S. troops have been targeted 165 times. This last weekend, the situation escalated dramatically when Iranian proxies targeted a U.S. military post in Jordan known as Tower 22. Tragically, these proxies of the Iranian regime, these militias, used a drone to attack the base, killing 3 American heroes as they slept. Sergeant William Rivers, Specialist Kennedy Sanders, and Specialist Breonna Moffett made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country that night. These brave individuals were the first American service members killed by enemy fire since the start of the Israel-Hamas war last October. But they're not the first Americans that have been targeted by the Iranian regime. The truth is, as you look back at the changes in Iran since the revolution in 1979, the Iranian regime has been in what you might call a low-grade war against America and American interests for the last 45 years. Last month, 2 Navy SEALs were killed while seizing a vessel carrying Iranian-made arms intended for the Houthi rebels in Yemen. These brave SEALs and their comrades prevented the Houthis from receiving ballistic missiles and cruise missile components that could have been used to target U.S. forces or commercial traffic in the Red Sea or the nation of Israel. Today, I know our country mourns alongside of the families of each of those heroes, and we pray for the safety of the service members who continue to serve our nation, providing these stability missions in the Middle East. But as I said, the violence that we're seeing and experiencing in recent days is only a tragic continuation of Iran's decade-long proxy war against the United States. I said Iran is the #1 state sponsor of terrorism in the world. That's a fact. And the reason they operate through proxies is because they don't want to directly confront the United States, because they fear American military might, as they should. But what they do is they will carry out terrorist attacks, having been equipped and trained and provided weapons by the Iranian regime against innocent civilians and American service members in the region. Of course, relations between the United States and Iran have been extremely fraught and violent since the 1979 Iranian Revolution, when the country quickly transformed from a pro-Western democracy to an anti-Western theocracy. Its supreme leader is driven by a radical ideology and a deep hatred of the United States and the freedoms that we enjoy. He even referred to the United States as the Great Satan. And we've witnessed over the last 4+ decades that shift from a pro-democracy to an anti-American policy had carried with it very serious consequences. Of course, many of us remember the Iranian hostage crisis. The movie Argo was written about getting some of the Americans, some of the 52 Americans out of Iran who had been held hostage for up to a year. 4 years later, Iranian-backed terror group Hezbollah in Lebanon bombed a Marine Corps barracks in Lebanon, killing 241 American service members. And then in 1996, Iran orchestrated an attack on U.S. Air Force personnel in Khobar, Saudi Arabia. A truck bomb was detonated next to a building housing American troops, killing 19 U.S. Air Force personnel and a local Saudi citizen, and wounding 498 others. Then, during the war in Iraq from 2000 and 2011, it became common knowledge that Iran was supplying the most dangerous form of munitions, explosively formed penetrators that penetrate the armor of Humvees and other up-armored vehicles that the U.S. forces were in, and planted numerous IEDs, killing hundreds of American troops. And today, as our country is mourning the troops that were killed in Jordan last weekend at the hand of Iranian proxies, we need to be absolutely clear-eyed about the fact that this is not a new innovation. This isn't something that just happened in the last few days. This has been going on for 45 years. To be clear, this is not an exhaustive list of the violence Iran has unleashed against the United States and our interests. Sadly, this just scratches the surface. But it's important to look back at the history to understand the Iranian intentions toward the United States and our allies. Tehran has consistently waged acts of war against the United States. It's gone to great lengths to export terrorism around the globe, and it's engaged in gross human rights violations against its own people. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, otherwise known as IRGC, is the loyal henchman responsible for leading these efforts. It's a branch of the Iranian armed forces that tries to squash democracy movements both at home and abroad by pushing its extreme ideology beyond Iran's borders. They provide training and equipment to terrorists that they use to kill innocent civilians, not just in Israel, not just in Syria and Iraq, not just in Lebanon, but even in the southern part of the Arabian Peninsula in Yemen. The IRGC wields vast power and influence, and it uses its capabilities to spark turmoil throughout the Middle East. As I said, it provides arms, training, and foot soldiers to these terrorist groups. As the world has seen in recent months, those attacks are quickly intensifying. It's a grave cause for concern in a very dangerous neighborhood, the sort of escalation that we're seeing by Iran via its proxies. But the only responsible answer is for the United States to take swift and decisive action to respond to these attacks. Because if we don't, we're sure to be met with more. Sadly, I don't think the Biden administration has responded to this attack with the sort of decisiveness that it needs. As far as we know, the administration hasn't taken any action to target Iran's leaders, the IRGC or the Quds Force, militarily, financially, or otherwise. We're told that the president has decided what he's going to do, but he's not sharing that with us. And I fear, as more and more time goes by, the Iranian regime will not connect the killing of 3 American service members in Iraq by Shia militias backed by Iran with whatever the subsequent kinetic attack against Iran's forces are. We're all watching to see what the coming days may hold. But I'd like to encourage President Biden that when it comes to Iran, there's no benefit to applying anything less than maximum pressure. Now, we're not talking about American boots on the ground. We're not talking about another war. We're talking about deterrence. So if there's no price to be paid for these repeated attacks against civilians and American service members, they are going to continue. This is not a cost-benefit analysis made by the regime. This is pursuant to their radical ideology where they want to destroy Israel, and they call America the great Satan. So you know they don't mean us well. Iran's leaders must learn that the attacks on U.S. service members and American interests will be returned in kind. Regardless of who carries out an attack, Iran or its proxies, the Iranian regime must be brought to account. It is the head of the octopus, and the tentacles are the proxies they use to commit mayhem and terrorism around the region. The only way to achieve deterrence and to prevent this conflict from widening is to teach the Iranian regime that these sort of unilateral terrorist attacks will not be tolerated. Given the escalating tensions between our countries, President Biden can't continue promoting the same weak policies that he's embraced over the last few years, trying to appease the Iranian regime because he wants to get them back in the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or the Iran nuclear deal, negotiated under President Obama. He's lifted sanctions, which have allowed Iran to supply China and other countries oil, which has helped bolster their economy. They've continued to enrich uranium, getting closer and closer to a breakout for a nuclear weapon. As dangerous as Iran and its proxies are now, can you imagine what it would be like if they had a functioning nuclear weapon in the region? What would the response be of countries like Saudi Arabia, UAE, and other Arab countries that Iran has historically fought for control, not just geographic control, but control as the leader of the Muslim world, according to their own brand of Islam. Unfortunately, the messages that President Biden has sent over the last few years, from the disastrous withdrawal in Afghanistan without even notifying our allies, just pulling the plug and having the Taliban march in without a shot being fired. From the withdrawal from Afghanistan to the attempts to appease Iran in order to get back to the Iran nuclear deal, to the foolish decision to unfreeze $6 billion in Iranian assets, the Biden administration has projected an image of weakness when it comes to foreign policy. These missteps have sent a message to the Supreme Leader that he can continue to push until we push back. The Supreme Leader will naturally continue to test the limits of this administration to see how far he can go. We know what his ultimate aims are. We know the methods by which they act, and we don't want any more dead Americans because Iran continues to attack Americans and American allies in the Middle East. The root and foundation of all of this violence and instability in the Middle East is Iran. We can talk about the Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, the Shia militias, but it is Iran that finances, equips, and trains these terrorists. That's true today, and it's been true literally for the last 45 years. From the Iran hostage crisis to the regime's outright support of terrorist groups in the Middle East, to the latest attack that killed 3 U.S. troops, Iran has demonstrated over and over and over again its unequivocal hatred of the United States. President Biden cannot hit Iran with kid gloves or allow the attacks on our service members to go unanswered. It is a lesson that we have to learn, apparently from history, time and time again, that appeasement is not a viable strategy when it comes to autocrats and dictators and terrorists. Appeasement doesn't work. And it's time for the president to impose crippling consequences on the Iranian regime. And I'm talking about on the instruments of their terrorism, which is the IRGC and the Quds Force, would be a good place to start. Mr. President, I yield the floor.